Hello, I'm Jerrsair, your local comic creator, and over these past couple years, I've focused on writing my comic, and not just writing willy-nilly. I've been taking it seriously and writing consistently, so I want to show off all my progress. Also, I should mention that it was supposed to be about 2024 or 2025-ish, but it's more of the past year and a half because it took me half a year to get around to making this video, but semantics. Okay, maybe it's been a year.
Bruh.
Additionally, I think it's important to mention you don't need to know the extensive lore of my stories or characters to enjoy this video. This video is less about plot and more about my writing process and improvements. Now, the last thing before I get into the video, what I'm drawing is Anyways, let's get into the video. I'd say the first topic we should tackle is what stories I worked on. Yeah, I know I just said I focused on my comic, and that's not false. I just also got some stuff done on some of my other stories, and actually, a part of figuring out my writing process was figuring out how exactly to focus on one story and how to juggle others. And if you know me, you know that I have a whole lot of stories, and my brain has a habit of bouncing between them. I'll get into exact statistics and numbers of the grand scale later, but for now, just take my word for it. I've been writing with the intent to publish since I was 9, so of course I'm going to have an enormous pile of stories. So, when I decided I wanted to take my comics seriously over the next year, I made some rules for myself that basically all boil down to don't consume content for other stories. What do I mean by that? Well, for me, I would consume content in order to get inspiration, which would then keep me constantly writing for other stories. So if there's no inspiration for other stories, then there's not going to be that many new writing ideas, which is a barrier to keep me from writing them. This means no listening to playlists for other stories, even certain songs I don't listen to because I'll get an idea. No watching edits or reels related to other stories. No pinning things to other Pinterest boards. Basically, do not actively pursue other stories. Of course, as you guys know, this doesn't mean I didn't write anything for them because A, I'm not a machine, and B, I don't believe in ignoring ideas. Let me make it clear that I never actively pursued other stories, but if an idea naturally came to me one day, I would write it down. I'm allowed to write ideas down, I just can't actively look for new ideas. You get what I'm saying? I'll probably make a separate video going deeper into how I bounce them, but for this video, let's get into what stories we're looking at and go into specifics for each of them. So I figure we should start with the big one, Rogue Flare. Rogue Flare is my current comic that's in development, soon to release this year. It's a supernatural comedy story with hints of mystery and romance. The unofficial synopsis is Cleo and her family have hidden on Earth as humans, cut off from the Magi world, until an unknown Magi group begins targeting them. In an attempt to barter for information on her kidnapped brother, she's faced with an offer she can't refuse. Cleo enters Magi society as a vigilante in order to find her brother. However, the circumstances at which she became a vigilante came with the assignment of a human partner in crime. Seeing eye to eye seems impossible when there are ulterior motives behind every action. And now that you know what the story is about, I want to dive deeper into the writing now. And there's something you should know about: the Great Reorganization of 2023. Earlier, I've been writing for a long time. So a lot of stories are multiple years old, such as this comic, which is around 11 years old, I think. And I won't go too much into the advancement and accessibility of tech over that decade, but you can assume I haven't always written my comic in Google Docs. In fact, I didn't write my story in just one place. I wrote it in Word, on the Notes app in my phone, in notebooks, on tests, on homework, on napkins at restaurants. You get the idea. So then what happened during the Great Reorganization of 2023? Well, I decided my writing system sucked and I needed a better one. One that was all in the same place, preferably, and not just for Rogue Flare, but my other stories as well. So I picked out the stories of mine that had a large amount of room for them and decided to make a hub for each of them in Google Docs. All the smaller stories, I decided I'll give them their own space in Google Docs once they get bigger, because I knew the task ahead of me with the few I picked would be a long one. Yeah, well, because I'd be finding each and everything I've ever written down anywhere and putting it all in the same fucking document for each respective story. And I did it. And was that how my writing system was going to stay? Hell no, but it was a great foundation. And during that year, I also did a major overhaul on most of my old stories, and I rewrote each of them in their entirety. 2023 was a major year in my writing timeline, and so that's why I mentioned it. However, 2023 will not be factored into this video. It's just important for context that previous to the past year, I had set a foundation to go off of, and that's truly when I was taking writing more seriously. But this video isn't what I wrote in the past 2 years, because that would be as long as a movie. I'm so serious. Now, I've been very general up until this point because I had to get through all that context fast, but now we're going to get into specifics. In the Google Drive folder for Rogue Flare, there are 33 documents. 9 of those were last modified in 2023, so I won't go into depth on those in this specific video. But that doesn't mean I don't use them anymore. All of them contain official lore and analysis that are stone cold facts for the series, and that's why they haven't been modified. I do look at them for reference still to this day. As for the other 24, yes, I will explain each of those briefly as they pertain to the topic of this video. A lot of these documents were spent trying to figure out my writing process, as that was kind of my unspoken goal when I decided I want to release Rogue Flare sooner rather than later. I'd always struggled being a consistent writer. I had no trouble coming up with ideas, but I wasn't reliable with a deadline, one might say. So let me walk you through some of these documents to get a better understanding of the journey my monkey brain went on. Also, FYI, some of these document names might not make sense to you, but just go with it, okay? Document A, Gods Are Swindlers. A document I actually started in high school, but consistently kept coming back to it and adding on till about last year. It's 25 pages long, and its content mostly consists of rewriting the beginning chapter over and over, title ideas, early world building, and the majority of it being me responding to writing prompts from the book 90-Day Novel, and drawing parallels between my writing and various Shakespeare stories, specifically Macbeth. I was obsessed with Macbeth in high school. The 90-Day Novel did actually help me get to know my characters a bit more and develop them, but I actually found a better method for doing that later in high school, but that's a story for another time. Oh, and I should mention, back in high school, it was actually a novel series, and at some point in 2024, I flopped between a novel and webcomic series without a care in the fucking world, which is why I was referencing that document in 2024 when it was briefly a novel once more. However, once I was out of high school, other than a few times I didn't really write in this document, I referenced it, but eventually that got too annoying, so I went through the whole document and color coded the information in it and copy and pasted the information into each category's rightful place in other documents so that I didn't have to reference that document again. And that's our segue into our second document, where it was all copy pasted. And this is the document I referenced earlier where I took all my writing from everywhere else and put it into one document. I will say it does not include past novel versions of Rogue Flare, of which there were several. I've rewritten the story many times, and this document only had the current version, or as current as it could be at the time. Document B, GAS Timeline. Weighing in at 57 pages, we have our first mega important document, a document I actually still reference and use to this day. and this is where my actual writing process starts to form. As the name suggests, this document was different than any other one I'd had before. Instead of just a collection of ideas, it was actually in order. Crazy, I know. I'd also made use of the heading feature in Google Docs to where I'd make every major event a heading, since at that point I hadn't divided it into chapters. It was the closest thing I had to a completed story. Now, at some point, I came across this story structure analysis videos, and I thought, hey, this actually sounds like it really goes with my story. I thought, but maybe if this were here and that were there, it might actually lead to a bigger buildup at the end than I had originally planned. I moved around major plot points in my story after a single strike of inspiration. Of course, you can't rearrange the headings in Google Docs, so yeah, that was a bit disappointing to find out, but I was kind of already wanting to start a new document anyways, because when I say the document consisted of every idea I've ever had, I wasn't exaggerating. There were summaries of every scene I ever thought of, scrapped or not, and for each scene there were multiple versions because I hadn't picked a version yet. So I wanted to start fresh, go through the document, put it in the new correct order, weed out bad scenes, pick the correct versions, and just have a clean document so I could actually see what I was working with for this story. And hate to break it to you guys, but that's not the last time you'll hear me say that. I do that for almost every document here, but this is where it all started. In documents B and C, there was a bit of a struggle. I didn't want another 57-page document on my hands. I just wanted something quick I could look through and easily rearrange scenes, as I was still in the outlining / plotting stage. And looking back, I just want to tell myself, babe, your story is gigantic. You have to accept that your documents will be long as shit. You will never know the joys of a 3-page document again in your life. So anyways, I was looking up ideas because I was like, if I just copy and paste this into another document, it's still going to be long. And I tried everything, man. I tried so hard. Someone online suggested post-it notes and going old school on a board. I didn't have a board, but I had post-it notes, and I was like, oh, I'll just pick them up in order when I'm done. No! God, please, not the sticky notes. Yeah, maybe they're great when your story is 1 novel length, Sharon, but not my comic, which is 4 to 5 books long. God, I tried to write out the scenes, but I stopped when the sticky notes took up half my room, and I hadn't even gotten to the midpoint yet. There were multiple incidents of cats walking through them while I was rearranging on the floor. If you so much as sighed in frustration loud enough, they'd blow down the street. I don't care what any sticky noter out there says. It's not feasible unless your story is a single book. And even then, it's gotta be a short one. No 500-page novel for this method. And guys, this isn't even my longest story, so I didn't think that would be a concern I'd have to factor in when I was trying these methods. Past me, the sticky note method is not for you. In fact, any physical traditional method is not for you. You don't have the space. There's nowhere in your house that's big enough to house a physical outline of your story where you can see all of the events at the same time. It was also annoying because if I made changes, I'd have to make them twice, once in the physical, once in the digital. So yeah, every method I tried, it was just still too fucking big, and at this point I was really trying to not doubt myself or my story. Like, was I doing something wrong? Why does every method the writers online suggest not work for me? Am I too detailed? Do I need to change my story? And it didn't help that anyone who I talked to about this didn't understand why I couldn't, quote-unquote, just write. Granted, the people who I talked to, half weren't writers themselves and the other half were just shitty people, but I wasn't one to let a little anxiety stop me from my dreams. Hell no. Fuck those losers. In fact, I wasn't really bothered by the people who thought I was doing it wrong. I was actually more frustrated that everything the YouTube writers would suggest, it just didn't work for me. I was frustrated that no one had the ability to help me. But I mean, that's nothing new. So I wasn't opposed to figuring it out for myself. I just knew it would take time, which was annoying. That leads us to another document on the path. After quickly realizing a real world traditional outline was not in the cards for me, I changed my method to strictly digital. In comes Document C Webtoon outline. It's 7 pages long. Now, sometime before this document was started, I had come to the conclusion that I would divide this series into sections based on the villain of that part of the story. The overarching series was controlled by a plot structure, and within each villain arc, there was another plot structure. A plot structure within a plot structure. It just makes sense. So, plot wise, I had to turn the series to be 4 books or 8 seasons long. At this point in time, anyways. This is not the case anymore, though. And by books, I meant novels. There was enough of the plot of the story to equal roughly 4 novels. I only know this because Rogue Flare used to be a novel series, so that was the metric I was used to using. Spoiler, I actually am not quite as accurate as estimating as I may have thought, but back to the document. I tried my best to not write down each minute scene and just generalize the story moving forward in a simple bullet point list, each bullet point being a short phrase describing the scene. Additionally, at this point, I started making decisions about what versions of scenes I wanted to go with. However, I got to page 7 and wasn't even halfway through the first book and was like, okay, this isn't really making my story arc easier to see, but I kind of accepted it and was like, well, I still made progress at making it more refined, just not necessarily more compact, so let's move forward. Enter Document D, Plot Outline. It's a single page. I decided before I delved into specifics to give myself some guidelines. I wrote out the plot structure for the entire series using the 3-act structure as a sort of roadmap. I was able to successfully complete this without much trouble. I was mainly going to use this as my key for when I actually started writing in more detail, because if you remember, my mega reference document with all the story written in it was out of order. However, the labels of the sections being the names of the villains, and the villains being major plot point and arcs in the story, I was still able to read everything in order because of memorizing Document D with the correct order of the villains. That was from 2023. I won't go into depth on it, but I'll just give you a quick description. Plot list was 2 pages long and was a quick dive into the subplots of the story. I went into some detail on how my character's desires and fears changed the direction of the story because of the subsequent actions. I also listed out every subplot I wanted to cover in Arc 1, both those that would complete in Arc 1 and those that would drag out into other arcs. Think of it as some sketches in my sketchbook, but it's words in a document. On to the next document, Document E, Plot Outline Book 1. As I said, I have a plot structure within a plot structure type situation, so now that I had the guidelines for the series, I wanted the guidelines for Arc 1 or Book 1, since that was the part I was going to be focusing on at the moment. It's only 2 pages long, but inside I actually have 2 versions of the plot. The first one being when I was more confused, but I came back later and added a second one that was completely filled out. Now keep in mind, my head at the time, Arc 1 or Book 1 was 2 webtoon seasons long still. I fear I'm heavy on the foreshadowing, but when I say length matters, just take my word for it. Now we start picking up some pace now that we know our boundaries for this series and arc. Document F, Act 1 timeline. It's 2 pages long. To make this document, I'm bouncing between docs B and C. In this document, I'm outlining Act 1, but in more detail now. I'm actually dividing Act 1 into webtoon episodes. I fit exactly 4 in Act 1, I believe, because it's relatively short. And each episode consists of a very detailed bullet point list. Every scene change, every topic shift in conversation, even occasional lines of dialogue I pulled from Doc B were included. Quickly follows Document G, Act 2, Part 1 timeline, which is 2 pages. This document is just the sequel to Doc F. It's episodes 5 through 8, each with a bulleted list also. Not much explanation is needed, and since I had 8 episodes outlined in detail at this point, I thought I would start writing the scripts. And I also went ahead and storyboarded the first episode to get a feel for things. Now, I like to say at this point I made a lot of progress. A lot of sense of the story was made. And yes, it was hard to write all those documents, but I'd say right about here is where I start having some real problems. I did write the scripts for the first couple episodes. Great, right? Well, yeah, except I didn't go with the first version. I rewrote the first couple episodes over and over and over and over and over and over. And even when I would get to a point where I might like it, I couldn't write any further. It was so hard to visualize what was next, even though I knew. There were 11 documents of me starting over, and honestly, I started over many more times than that. We're not counting any start overs from past years, but just within these documents alone, I would try to fix it over and over until I thought of something way better and wanted to start a new document. So there's no telling how many times I actually started over. This was 100% because of my writing process. To give you a better picture of how I was writing, it was like a filtration system, and still is in some ways, but nothing like at that specific time. I would write any random new ideas I had for another scene in my notes app. They would build up, then I'd copy paste into my email, then from the email into Doc B, then I would sum it up in Doc C, then I would go into specific detail narrowed down to an episode in Doc F, then I would write the script in one of my many script documents, and I still had no idea how to control when I came up with stuff and when I didn't. I had such a hard time visualizing my plot, I couldn't write what happened next. But I didn't have writer's block, new ideas were constantly coming in, and I had no idea what new idea would actually be a good beginning, and there were so many versions, and I liked all of them in some way. I was stuck in an endless cycle, and I was stuck there for a few months. Now, I won't say that was useless, and I don't regret getting stuck there, because all that writing made me get a better feel for writing comics, as previously I'd only written novels. And all the writing I had wasn't bad, not at all. I just kept thinking of better fits. It helped me build out my characters' personalities and get a better picture of the minute interactions and what their relationship dynamics were with each other outside of the plot. In fact, most of the scenes I wrote did canonically happen, they just happened before the story started. And other scenes, I plan to write similar ones later in the story when the mood is right. So I realized my process wasn't working for me, and I mean, that was nothing new, but this whole time I've been trying to find my process and I just haven't found it yet. In comes a new method by complete happenstance. I was listening to an AuthorTube video, yes, listening, not watching, and she was going through how she set up her document. I decided I would try her method, so I set up my document like she said, and it turns out I completely misheard her and I accidentally invented a new but similar method. The funny thing is, I had no idea until I rewatched the video later and actually looked at what was on her screen. Oh look, there it is, Document H, Season 1 Setting/Scene List. It's set up as a 2-column table. Left column is the setting, down to the room in whatever building. Right column is the scene description in bullet points, and detailed down to the character's expression, extensive dialogue, and occasional outfit descriptions. The document is fitted with chapter headings, and the chapter headings in this document are in fact chapters. there are multiple episodes within one chapter in this document usually. The chapters are more of a grouping of topic slash subplot, how it would appear in the graphic novel basically. I compiled everything I had written from all the other documents into this one within the confines of season 1, of course. And what I wanted with the story. So after quote unquote outlining, it feels bad to call it outlining because it's so detailed and it's basically written but not in script format. Anyways, after outlining the first 3 chapters, I kind of had a weird moment where I was like, do I want to stay true to its novel origins? I temporarily decided I wanted both a novel and a comic, and that I'd write the novel first so it'd be faster. So, yeah, I used the doc as a ref for writing the first couple of chapters of the novel version, and was it way better than any past novel version I'd written? Hell yeah. But I had gotten so used to writing comics, I was struggling to find how to translate minute visual things without using images, and I realized I actually liked writing comics better. And I realized I actually missed having the images, and I really wanted a comic more than a book. I felt like a comic fit better with this specific story, so I stopped. Again, the writing was not wasted, I actually got pretty far, and so I just put whatever I could into Doc H. So now I went back to Doc H and I started my new writing process, emailing myself any new idea and copy pasting into the bottom of Doc H. I take it from Doc H and write the scripts. I rewrote the beginning chapter scripts a few more times, of course, but with the new process that was helping me visualize better, I was able to stop rewriting. And no, I didn't have to hold myself down and forbid myself from touching my keyboard. I stopped rewriting because I actually came up with the first chapter that I fell in love with. And this time when I said, this is the final version, I meant it, and I could feel that I meant it. Doc H as of today is 100 pages and counting, as I'm not finished writing it, and we'll get into more of that later. 1, Draft 3. It's currently 9 pages. That would be because I'm about 2.5 chapters into it, and as the name suggests, I had 2 main other drafts. This is kind of the case for a lot of my documents, and I'm omitting going into detail on them just so I sound like I'm making any kind of sense in the way I progressed. But just know that my page count measures up when it comes to developing my story. Oh, and I did start realizing something. You know the shit I've been foreshadowing the whole video? Yeah, it's upon us. So the thing about me is I get overwhelmed by vague tasks easily, which is why I try to specify them so that I know there's an end. So I have a habit of calculating how long certain chapters or documents should be in relativity to each other. I also calculate it because I can calculate how much I have left or how long till the end of a chapter or arc or series, and I can set my goals accordingly. I also collect mental data on how much effort and time it takes me to complete certain things with my writing, all based on whether I've met past goals or not. It's all about adjusting your future goals based on the outcome of past ones. And yes, I generally have a schedule because I take my writing seriously and it's my life's work. But back to what I was saying, sometimes my calculations can be spot on, but a lot of the times it's just constant adjusting of timelines and stuff. That's just life, man. However, sometimes the things you're basing your calculations on are out of your control and you have no idea what they're going to do. There are some things you just cannot tame. I would talk about rate of progression and try to calculate how long my series would be so that I could calculate when I would be finished. I would compare stuff I had, like, for example, in my outline, chapter 1 was 1 page, but in the script, it was 5 pages. So it was a ratio of 1 to 5 ish. But I knew I couldn't go off chapter 1 because it was a standalone and way shorter than any of the other chapters. So chapter 2 was about 1 page in the outline, but in the script, I hadn't even made it through the first scene and it was already 5 pages long. So you see the conundrum here, but yet I still did this anyways. So I was balancing trying to edit things like, okay, this chapter is pretty long. Should I split it into 2 chapters? How much should be in an episode? I think the episodes are going to have to be different lengths than the chapters. If I do this, how many panels a chapter, then how many episodes are in a chapter, and how many weeks is it going to take to do an episode? If I do such and such part of an episode a week, how many years will it take me to complete the story? I nearly drove myself crazy trying to predict everything myself and not being sure how much I could handle and not knowing how much was too much or not, or how to even break it up. Because I was just dividing it up by plot up until this point, not taking into account the drawing. So I had to do a reset because this wasn't working. I have a whole list of other stories I want to tell. I cannot have this story take my entire life to complete. I also had in the back of my mind, if this story is as long as it is right now, what does that mean for the story I want to do after this? Because the second story is way longer than Rogue Flare, so I am in trouble for the second story if I don't make Rogue Flare shorter or more concise. At the time, I had decided that Rogue Flare was 4 books, or 8 seasons long. To create a picture that makes more sense, I had divided by the midpoint of each of the books would be the end of a season. I needed to change it. I decided that the midpoints of the books would be the midpoints of the seasons as well, and I would just squish everything down, cutting out extra character interaction and world building as needed. This essentially cut it in half, in theory. 4 seasons instead of 8 sounds much better and more doable. At this point, I needed to do some tedious work to figure out exactly where I was at in terms of the story. I previously mentioned that as part of my old process, I would copy-paste new ideas into the bottom of the settings scene list. I sat down and organized those ideas, or those of scenes, into chronological order, and then placed them rightfully into the document. Then, of course, I copy-pasted the rest of the stuff I had emailed myself into the documents. I then was able to take a better look at how exactly things were progressing. The first 24 chapters I had pretty much finished outlining in my extensive method. All of the following chapters had a few scenes in each of them, but weren't completely fleshed out from beginning to end. To put this in perspective with numbers, that 100-page document setting scene list, well, from chapter 1 through 24, that was all 75 pages. The remaining 25 pages being chapters 24 to 73. Yeah, so that's what I mean by fleshed out versus not. Kind of strange, I know. And the thing that makes it a bit worrisome is that chapter 24 is not even the midpoint, and it's 73 chapters right now for season 1, but it's missing a bunch of in-between transition chapters. Like I said, a majority of it is bare bones. So what does that mean for me? Webtoon seasons are usually 100 chapters max, and I was very easily climbing there. And when I take into account the other seasons, season 4 had a bunch of stuff happening in it and more than one villain. I heavily considered making a season 5 to dump all the extra lore and plot lines being tied up into. For months and months, I really thought about doing it because I didn't want the ending to feel rushed. Because there are so many plot lines and subplot lines and lore that needs to be resolved and come to fruition through the story, especially since there's a large-ish cast, meaning there's multiple plot lines for each of them. Plus, all the connections I have to make and foreshadowing Pacing is something I feel like is a struggle for everyone, and it's hard to get right in a comedy series that's also kind of traumatic. Think Delicious in Dungeon. They did a great job with that, and I take a lot of inspiration from it. And I do worry a bit about season 2 and 3 because I know the least about them. Not saying I don't know what happens in them, that's not the case at all. It's just a bit more vague and up in the air than the first and fourth seasons. But I have to constantly remind myself that this story has to finish so I can get to my other ones. And anything I cut out, I can always publish either on Patreon or as part of an art book for the series. People can still see it, just all the world building is not necessary. And conversely, if they want to watch the characters just sit around and chat, I can happily draw a short comic and post it somewhere. So I'm putting in a limit. Each season can only be 100 episodes that are 50 to 60 panels each. I can do less, but I cannot go over. On one hand, this will be difficult because I will want to add in more buffer chapters and I'll really choose the right ones to include, but on the other hand, this provides me an end and means I won't endlessly write until God comes. It's a boundary that will make it easier for me to cut out unneeded chapters of leisure. I also decided that for sure I can only have 4 seasons, not 5. I will just have to shove everything into season 4 for the finale. Some positives to that are that it means I can basically already know a majority of the events in season 4, so there's no confusion there. Additionally, this means that I won't have to stretch out a season 5 because the villain that I would have put there just has a few intense encounters, not necessarily a season of battles. This also means, of course, that I can move on to the next story sooner. And I know I keep stressing that point, and I should clarify that it doesn't mean I don't enjoy Rogue Flare or that I don't want it to last forever. I would love for it to last forever, and I will probably always make content for it as long as I am breathing. I mean, literally one of the inspirations I draw from for it is One Piece. Crazy, I know. I only stress moving on to the next story because I have so many stories to tell, and humans don't live forever. Yet. We don't know though. Maybe soon we can. Anyways, I'll get into the magnitude of stories I'm talking about later. Back to the cutting back on stuff. The first episode of the series I wanted to be a standalone. Different from a majority of the other episodes, which were a chapter or collection of multiple episodes, usually when the main cast has gone on a mission somewhere. But I wanted the first couple episodes to be standalone to follow the path of letting the readers know what the story is about and hook them, because the first 2 to 3 episodes are important, like that on platforms like Webtoon. However, the first chapter when scripted was 64 panels, and then when I storyboarded it, it ended up being like 86. And I did start drawing it, but then I was like, this is too many to be in one episode. And splitting it into 2 episodes is just too much. The first episode sets the tone, but it doesn't really get into specifics of the story, so the second episode needs to not be a continuation of the first. I should also clarify that while I'm mentioning metrics and scales of 50 panels, that is because when I intend to go full time with it, I'd love to do 50 panels. However, starting out, I'm currently in school and I'll be starting a job, so I can't release 50 panels at once as of now. But there's no use in measuring based on the small amounts I can release now because that would make things so much more confusing. But to get back on track, I decided that the first chapter cannot exceed 50 panels. I'll have to cut some panels, and it's for the best because there really isn't much to focus on in the first chapter. It's just a small catalyst, one of many. Remember Doc H, the season 1 setting list? Well, there's also a Doc H for each of the 4 seasons, though of course 2 through 4 are not quite as filled out. They're a combined 13 pages. Although I should stress that these documents' page numbers are not exactly correct because I have like a bunch of new scenes that I've emailed myself that I have yet to copy paste into the respective documents. And speaking of copy pasting, my current process is much more streamlined. I email myself the scenes, copy paste them into their respective season's document, then reference those to write the scripts. I also have made a bunch of plot changes in a way where I'm not exactly cutting out stuff, I'm just reordering when they happen. So since I'm doing that, Doc H, the setting scene list for season 1, is currently an old draft now, and I've created a new one. Oh my gosh, so many documents. I also created a writing database in Notion. I'll go over the space specifically dedicated to Rogue Flair. In the homepage, I have the main Pinterest board linked, the main Spotify playlist, a quote about the theme of the story, and a few databases within it. The first is the plotting database with outlines, world building, characters, locations, management, and references. In the outlines section, I have the outlines for the entire series, being JS timeline, webtoon outline, and plot outline. In the references section, I have another database saying the type of references. In the style references, I have it divided into what part of the style I'm referencing. I have just the coloring section, the lines section, a section referencing both, and a section for just parts like eyes. I basically insert a few images of the art style, then at the bottom list the artist and possibly the series it came from. Back in the main homepage, the other database I have is one with a section for each of the 4 seasons. Each season's section's layout is the same, just changed with the specific links and such to things pertaining to the specific season. The season 1 has the Spotify playlist link, a description of the main plot of the season, and the plot outline of season 1. Then there's a database below containing the script documentation for season 1. It also contains a references database. There's a section for season specific outline and character designs. In the outlines database, I have the setting scene list and also some bulleted lists that help me keep track of all the plot lines that need to start or be resolved, such as what does the audience need to know to experience the end? What lessons do the characters need to learn before the end? What plots are we balancing? And a plot comparison spreadsheet comparing my plot to the plots of stories Rogue Flair uses as inspiration. Then, back on the main homepage, I have a spreadsheet tracking the making of the episodes, tracking the season and episode number, its status of completion, whether I posted it, and the scheduled date. I have a database for all my stories and have similar documents like timelines and outlines and such. Now to get into my notes app. I have 32 notes specifically in the folder for Rogue Flair. I have 17 for that second story I mentioned. I have 4 for another story. I have 6 for another. Oh, and 101 for the rest, with some of the previous stories mixed in. They're all kind of grouped together for some reason, and there are just some loose in the notes app for random stories, but it's hard to count those up for obvious reasons. I literally use my notes app for everything, even not writing related things, of course. I have 28 main playlists for Rogue Flair. There are a handful I didn't count because they were for characters shipped with characters from another story. I have a total of 202 playlists, most of which are for my various stories. I'd say maybe 10 or 15 are for non-story related things. I have around 6 to 7 Pinterest boards for Rogue Flair. I have a closet board where I gather references for outfits for character design, special events, and world building that happens in the comic. It has 9 sections and 218 pins. I have the world board, where it's a collection of some later scene characters and world building things, such as catalyst characters that are not in the main cast, magical items, lineage of the main cast, prophecies in the world of the story, connections between the main cast, and special locations throughout the world. It has 8 sections and 471 pins. Then there's the main board that has the main cast that's more season 1 specific. It also has the season 1 villains, the publicity or political climate, major plot points, each with their own section, what the main cast future is, love interests, and each character section going into their mental struggles, magic, how their designs change each season, and ideas for future character design. And of course, memes for how the characters interact with each other. This board has 10 sections and 1,800 pins. Then there's the magic board, which is another one of the world building boards, where it goes into each species that exists within the world. It goes down to their appearance in each of their forms, their color scheme, how their magic manifests, and how they fight in battle. I'm hoping to add in some clothing choices and societal rules, along with political factions and who rules who type situation. This board has 8 sections and 237 pins. Then there's Harrison Characters board, which focuses solely on the main character's family and goes into each of their troubles, design changes, their past, their respective magic, and their relationships with each other, including those both dead and alive. This board has 7 sections and 591 pins. The next one is a characters board, which as the name suggests, has a bunch of characters in it. Not all of them pertaining to Rogue Flair, but there's enough in there to count it. The same goes for the clothing board. For the characters that do pertain to Rogue Flair, each of their sections go into their younger selves. A lot of it is prior to whatever trauma they've experienced, and then it also includes their future trauma. This board has 19 sections and 1,500 pins. Then there's a board that has a bunch of crack ships in it where characters from Rogue Flair and other series get shipped with other characters of mine that aren't canon. This board has 9 sections and 260 pins. I have a bunch of other boards for other stories as well, but that would take literally forever to go through. But there has already been so much information shoved in this video, I'll just save it for another time. I'll just give you some quick numbers. Not counting Rogue Flair, I have 60 other stories. 1 other in the final draft phase, 13 are in some number of a draft, 10 are outlined, and 36 are in the beginning idea phase. What problems did I run into? I ran into problems visualizing my plot. I also struggled with stopping editing the first couple of chapters over and over. I struggled to choose what I wanted to do with my story, anywhere from choosing the medium to what I wanted to do with the characters. I had problems with overwriting and including so much information. I also had to work very hard at maintaining consistent writing schedules. So, where did I improve, and did I fix my earlier problems? I figured out a system that worked for me and made it easier to visualize my plot all at once. I don't regret trying all those other writing systems because no writing is wasted writing, even if it's not used in the story. It's all practice, making you get better with each attempt. My writing has greatly improved from when I first wrote the original version all those years ago, and it's even improved within the past 3 years. My writing now has the ability to be so much more complex, and I can balance many more plots than I could the first time. I also landed on a permanent first chapter. I don't regret editing the first chapter over and over because none of the other ones were right. The moment I started typing the current first chapter, I knew it was the one. It was a gut feeling, an instinct. I still work at making the best decisions for my story, and I'm certain I've gotten better at it. Especially when it's an older story like Rogue Flare, you have to find a way to balance keeping true to the original goals while also changing some things to make it better than its first version. From big decisions to small, minute decisions, you have to ask yourself, is this truly what I want? Is my past self influencing this decision? Where do I want this story to take my readers? I found that the best way for me to make a decision I don't doubt my answer on is by trying out all the options I want to do, just for a bit, to see where my heart truly lies. For example, a big decision was whether to have Rogue Flare be a written book or a comic. My original goal was to have it as a novel, but that was for many reasons at the time. One, novels were all I knew and consumed. I didn't know of any comics or manga or anime. I only knew the Saturday cartoons on my TV. Two, at the time, I did not see myself as an artist, even though I drew occasionally. Three, I only had novelists and writer friends to look up to and inspire me. My world was fairly small as I was a child. But currently, everything somewhat flipped on its head. I have mostly artist friends and consume mostly comics, not novels. And a small fact that actually factored into my decision to make it a comic was that when I was a kid writing novels, I would actually draw scenes happening in the story and include them every few pages. Even as a child with no concept of what a comic was, I was adamant on creating visual elements to my stories. I also have always felt strongly that characters and outfits they wore and places they went all looked a very specific way in my head, and I did not like the idea of a fan envisioning them any other way than I intended, as would happen often with books. But I also struggled on the opposite side of that as a reader, where I get it, where you envision something from a novel a certain way and then the writer, it turns out it's different, and you're like, no, I refuse the canon, I refuse it. But I get it. But anyways, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I did temporarily try to rewrite Rogue Flare as a novel to try and honor my original goal for the story. And while I will say my writing has greatly improved since elementary school, and I was very proud of it, it did not hit the same at all. Where were the little comical chibi panels of Cleo making a funny face at her dad? I couldn't add those in the novel because that's just not how the medium works. You can't describe physical comedy quite as well. All the little visual details had to be omitted because no one wants to read that many descriptions. The way the current story had developed, it didn't fit the novel medium anymore, and I missed the more comical side of Rogue Flare. Furthermore, I gauged how much I was excited reading back my work, and was I more excited reading back my first chapter of my novel, or was I more excited scrolling through the webcomic episode? We know the answer to that now, but the important thing to stress here is that I would have never known which one I preferred unless I tried them both within a similar time frame. If I had never tried it and picked one, I would have always doubted and wondered if I should have picked different for the rest of my life. But because I tried, I know. And this applied to even the smaller decisions. Like I was struggling with the characters' personalities. I was like, who is the meaner one out of the main two? Can they both be mean and nice at the same time? Which facade that the main character is putting up is her real personality? Cleo had like 3 or 4 facades of personality at one point, because I was just like, okay, let's just try out each of these combinations for the characters. If Cleo has this personality, that means she wouldn't do such and such scene with Star, or vice versa. Which one makes the most sense? Do I want to stick to their original personalities, or do I want to have them different? I tried a few runs and would basically come across a scene and I didn't like how it turned out because of one of their personalities, and would either be like, okay, either we cut this scene or one of their personalities has to change. Go back and take a right instead of a left, kind of thing. Decisions became easier to make the more I wrote. The more drafts I accumulated, because I genuinely wouldn't know whether something would work or not unless I tried it. I mean, maybe I would, but I might doubt my decision, like I said earlier. I have also genuinely found a way to improve my tendency to overwrite. It does help to set concrete barriers that you have to stay within, such as a panel or chapter limit. Additionally, now that I have documents that I can better visualize my plot in, it's much easier to catch overwriting early in the outlining stage. However, this problem isn't completely unavoidable because sometimes the transfer from outline to script can be a bit crazy. But I'm nowhere near the issue when I was a new writer and would give page-long descriptions of a room. And I don't just mean that because it's pictures, not words now. I'm still not perfect, and I don't expect myself to be, because I will honestly write until the world ends and I burst into flames or something. I'm still learning to set realistic goals and keep myself on track and not make the next One Piece. Furthermore, I have been able to write more consistently than in the past. I'm pretty sure I've said this before, but within the past 3 years, I have done the most writing I've ever done in my life. I kept adjusting and changing my schedule and occasional breaks along the way, of course, to keep it healthy. But I've been writing so much and have made so much progress, even when I'm not sitting at my computer. I'm on the train emailing myself 5 different scene ideas, on average coming up with at least 1 or 2 new scenes every day while not at the computer. Also, when I'm not at the computer, I'm still always thinking about it, listening to playlists for that story, pinning stuff to the Pinterest boards, saving reels and TikToks to the stories folder, watching and listening to videos about writing and comic creation. I'm also going over the scenes and characters I've already written over and over in my head, looking for plot discrepancies, editing and rearranging and cutting things out. And to make things more exciting, I scheduled out a plan of attack to finish outlining or writing the entire series, and do a lot of pre-production like making and gathering 3D assets and building a buffer, so that when I release my comic, I don't have to worry about figuring out the hard stuff, and I just have to maintain until I can go full-time with my comic. I know I'll feel so relieved when I have it fully written out, and I'll have a buffer of scripts, so if I need to backtrack because I think of something better, I can make needed edits before it's released to the world. Buffers save life, guys. And I have always changed and edited my schedule for writing to just keep trying to make it more streamlined and work better for me. So as of now, I have tried to set more realistic schedules and goals when it comes to my art and writing and stuff. I have assigned 1 task every day, and if there's 2 small tasks, then they're both on the same day, but no more than 2 tasks. And if the maximum time the task can take is 2 to 3 hours or so. Of course, I am a little worried about the tight writing schedule I have coming up for the outlining, because even though it's less than I would have given myself in the past, it's still pretty hefty. But I'll just have to do what I usually do, which is try it out, and if it doesn't work, then I change it until it does work. On the more feeling side of things, cracking the code at finding a writing style that worked for my brain, that could help me translate the concepts that are in my head into actual artistry, was super hard, but super rewarding. It feels weird to say, but my story ended up being everything I wanted, yet it didn't turn out at all how I expected it to at the same time. I have a gut feeling this will turn out good. Also, if you want to check out something cute like a tote bag, keychain, print, or sticker, you should check out my shop at jerrsairstudio.square.site. That's all for today, guys. Bye!